GMetrix Practice Test 2, questions 25 through 30 for Adobe PhotoShop. Let's go ahead and get started with task 25 here. Click on the appropriate tool that will erase the yellow area around the image to transparency with a single click. So in this one, I think we're going to maybe use the Magic Eraser tool. We'll go ahead and try that, Magic Eraser tool, and select Next. And we are correct. So I think that the idea here is that the Magic Eraser is going to be better at selecting solid colors, while the background eraser that we saw listed in those options is better at dealing with complex backgrounds. We're going to go ahead and select Next here. Question 26, which tool in the Select and Mask workspace would you use to add fine details to the selection like hair from this image? Well, I'm going to be honest, I don't really use this workspace a whole lot, but I think we can use some context clues here to help us solve this problem. So if we look at the different options here, there's a few things that are in common. We see a lot of brushes, we see different shapes, geometric shapes, lots of circles in here. We recognize the lasso tool, we recognize maybe the hand tool and this selection tool here, but I believe that the one we're looking for is going to be this one that looks like hair. This tells us to add fine details like hair from this image. Let's go ahead and try that and see if that's the correct option. We'll hit Next, and fingers crossed, it's correct. We'll go ahead and select Next. So these tests aren't necessarily about knowing the ins and outs of the program like the back of your hand, but about being able to problem solve and figure out exactly what it's asking and looking for those context clues. Task number 27, as you edit photos for your client's magazine, it is important to understand which types of editing are destructive and which are non-destructive. Match the appropriate editing method to the scenarios below. First off, what's destructive? What's non-destructive? Well, as the name would imply, destructive editing means that when we make these changes, we can't easily go back and undo them. As opposed to non-destructive editing allows us to go back and make changes at any time if we have to. So it's a much safer and much more preferred method of editing. First, transforming smart objects. Smart objects are inherently non-destructive editing. They are sort of a safety mechanism that is built into Adobe Photoshop to allow you to make changes that would normally be destructive, but in a non-destructive manner. So smart objects are used specifically for non-destructive editing. Masking is also non-destructive editing because you can always go back and adjust that mask if you need to. Next, using adjustment layers. This is also non-destructive editing. And the keyword here is layers, which brings us to the next question, making adjustments using the image adjustments menu. When we're making adjustments to an image using the image adjustments menu, it is directly applying that effect onto the image rather than onto an adjustment layer. So this is our first example of destructive editing. It is not easy to go back and reverse that later on. Lastly, using the clone stamp tool. This is another example of destructive editing, but this is a little bit of a trick question. There are ways of using the clone stamp tool in a non-destructive fashion by creating a new layer and sampling all layers underneath. However, by default, using the clone stamp tool on an image layer is going to be destructive editing, so be very, very careful there. We'll go ahead and select Next. And we are correct. Question 28, match each filter layer option with the type of layer it filters. So this is another one where, honestly, I didn't use this function of Adobe Photoshop much in my everyday work, but we're going to take our best stab at this and see what we can figure out by looking for context clues based on the pictures we see here. So A looks like some sort of picture, so I'm going to guess that that is going to be a pixel layer. So we'll go to, looks like they want us to drag from the left to the right instead of from the right to the left, but that's fine. Pixel layers is A. Next, C is going to be a text layer. That T is used pretty universally to indicate text or type. Same word for same thing. Type layer. So we'll go ahead and drag that onto C. Next, D is going to be some sort of shape. So you can see it's a square. Square is a good shape. We'll go ahead and drag that right there. Next up, E is going to be a smart object. So that is a document inside of a document, basically, that we talked about earlier. We'll drag our smart object onto E. And lastly, B is going to be a adjustment layer. So it sort of looks like a black and white icon. One of the things that a adjustment layer can do is make your image black and white. We're going to go ahead and select Next, and let's see, I've never used this function before, but we're still able to use our context clues to figure it out, and that is correct. We'll hit Next. Task number 29, drag and match the following items. So we're matching the terms on the left with the definitions on the on the right. I cannot talk today. Color mode, where each pixel is assigned an intensity value from 0 black to 255 white for viewing on a screen. So that's going to be RGB, and there's not really going to be a workaround for this. Actually, that might be 8-bit. We'll see. So I do believe that this question is referring to RGB, but that question is a little bit vague. But the maximum value in a RGB color space is 255, or rather an 8-bit RGB color space is 255, and the minimum is 0. If you see 0 to 255, that is going to be RGB. Next, the amount of color information available for each pixel in an image. That is going to refer to the bit depth. Next up, working space profile associated with the file. It can be changed to meet output needs. This is going to be the color mode. So this is like RGB, CMYK, lab, some things that we've discussed a little bit in our past videos. Color mode, where each pixel is assigned a percentage value for each of the process inks. So this one is going to be CMYK. These are the inks that are often used in color prints: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Next up, the range of colors that a color system can display. That one is going to be the gamut. Refers to the range of colors that a color system can display. And lastly, an image that includes only black, white, and shades of gray. This one, as the name would imply, is gray scale. We'll go ahead and select next. And we are correct. Lastly, from the following choices, select the best definition for typography. First, the art and design of arranging type when choosing a font style and color. Second, the feeling that is conveyed by the choice of font style and color. Third, the use of alignments, proximity, and contrast to emphasize certain text. And fourth, emphasizing important elements of text through the organization of content. There is a lot of very similar sounding options here, but I'm going to hone in on the keyword of art and design, which suggests kind of a process-oriented response. There's not really a great way of explaining this, but anything that's going to talk us up and make us feel better about ourselves and our industry is probably a good indicator on questions like this. We'll see if we're correct about the art and design of arranging type. We're going to hit next. Sounds like a very fancy response, and it was a very correct response as well. We're going to go ahead and select next. And again, this will show us our summary page. So make sure you screenshot your summary page before you submit your test. Again, we're looking at questions 25 through 30 for this portion. Make sure you give me 1 or 2 screenshots that show questions 25 through 30. Submit it on Google Classroom, and I'll see you all back in class. Bye now.